Hi, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jared Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On this week's episode, I'm talking to Ellen Lupton, and it is the final episode in my June series interviewing the professors from MICA who have advised this thesis project. Ellen, of course, for designers, likely needs no introduction. She's a director of MICA's graduate graphic design program and the senior curator of contemporary design at Cooper Hewitt. She's also the author of some of the classic design books like Thinking with Type and Type on Screen, and co-author of the excellent Graphic Design: The New Basics with Jennifer Cole Phillips. For the last 2 years, Ellen has been my professor and advised my thesis project and this podcast. So a few days after graduation, I finally sit down with her to talk about her own work as a designer and writer and teacher and curator, how the design industry and discourse has changed over the course of her career, and how she thinks about her audience and writing for design in a way that's accessible and clear without oversimplifying it. When I decided I wanted to go to graduate school a few years ago, I had applied to a couple schools I was interested in and honestly wasn't sure where I wanted to go until I had a Skype interview with Ellen, where I felt like she immediately got what I was interested in and why I wanted to go back to school. And when I hung up from that call, I knew that MICA was where I wanted to study. And I think I definitely made the right choice. 2 years later, this experience has been everything that I wanted it to be. I was given tools to think about the intersection of design criticism and practice in my own career. I got to meet some incredibly talented students. And as you saw over the last few weeks, study with some very smart professors. And perhaps most importantly, I got to make a podcast for my thesis, and it's turned into this project that will continue past my graduation. And I'm just so thankful for everyone at MICA for the platform to start this, and I'm really excited to see where it goes next. It's so fun to get to talk to people who are doing the kind of work I'm interested in, and Ellen obviously very much fits that. And so I hope that you enjoy my conversation with the great Ellen Lupton. The one part that I do just kind of want to start with your background, just to kind of set the stage for this other thing. These other questions that I have is, what came first for you? Did you, when you were in school, did you see yourself as a designer first or a writer first? Or how did those things come together?
Sure. So I went to Cooper Union, which is an art school, and I went there to become an artist.
Okay.
And then I discovered design, which I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And as I discovered design, I discovered this linkage between design and writing. And that to me was the revolution. That typography in particular was this link between writing and visual art. And I come from a family that's all English professors.
Oh, okay.
And I have a sister who's a very, very gifted scholar of English literature, who's my identical twin sister. And we kind of made a deal in high school that she was the writer and the scholar, and I was the artist.
Okay.
And that was cool because I was a terrible student and she was like 4.0, whatever. I was like not a good student in high school. And so that seemed like a fair deal. Mm-hmm. But I was a good writer too. And somehow I wasn't allowed to do that. And when I discovered typography, it was suddenly a way for me to take charge of the thing that I wasn't supposed to be doing. Right. And in fact, to take charge of the very content that she was exposing me to, which was critical theory. Right. So she was at Hopkins, and that was where like Jacques Derrida was first published in the US. And it was like the hotbed of this literary criticism. And so she was exposing me to that. And I was finding that a lot of that philosophy and critical thinking was related to architecture and the page and the word and the space between letters. And that, to me, that was it. They came together.
I just have one other question. That actually like kind of explains a lot of the work that you've done since then in a lot of ways. But I'm interested, at Cooper Union, and I talked to Abbott already, and I'm not sure the order of when these will come out, if his will come out first or not, but was that kind of connection something that a lot of people were thinking about at the time, or what was the design kind of culture?
That was not a lot of people in my circle were doing that. So Abbott and I were doing it, and I kind of brought to our relationship the critical theory and philosophy, and I was sort of channeling that through my sister and all that she had access as like a professional in that area. And he was much more attuned to like what was happening in the art world and what was happening in architecture. And together we as students at Cooper sort of that exploded for us. And we kind of brought that together as a team.
Yeah. And then so what's always been interesting to me about your work and your whole career is that that kind of very academic side and the critical theory side and the philosophy side has always been very much connected to making things. And as I've been here for the last 2 years and have been reading a lot of design history that I hadn't come across before, and finding all these obscure things that you had written in academic journals and things that I had never come across before. And so I'm interested in the evolution of your writing from something that's very academic to something that definitely appeals to a much more general audience. And I don't mean that judgmentally
at
all.
No, I
actually think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, well, so a lot of those critical writers, I'm thinking especially of Foucault and Barthes and Baudrillard and Lyotard, they wrote in an kind of obscure manner, which was the fashion, but they were read by a very wide audience, especially Roland Barthes. He wrote for the newspaper.
Yeah.
So their work wasn't strictly academic. It was like reaching out beyond that to be what was called a public intellectual.
Right.
And so that's really interesting to me.
Okay.
So when I was first starting to write, I really wanted to write like an academic because that was modeled for me by my heroes, including my PhD mother and my PhD sister. And they modeled a kind of professional writing, but also opened me to this more critical, open view of what writing can be. So I kind of learned how to write academically, but I always wanted it to not be obscure. I always wanted people to understand it. And so the more I learned how to write, the more I became conscious of being more clear and more direct.
So that was always something that you were interested in, was kind of making it something that was accessible to as wide an audience as possible.
I always wanted to be accessible.
Okay.
Even though early on I did more kind of footnoted. I was in an art history PhD program for a while. I really had to write academic things, and I love that. I still read a lot of academic writing. I respect it a lot. So now I'm really committed to writing in the clearest way possible, and that's become, a philosophy of mine.
Yeah. Do you? I'm curious about. This is a kind of two-part question. I'm curious of when you're writing, who your imagined readers are, and then the second part is, who are the people that buy your books? And the reason I asked that is that I found in doing these interviews, the people who seem to listen to this the most are people who are involved in education, whether it's students or professors, people who are in academia.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of professional people listening also, but I find it interesting that still that's kind of the audience. And I'm curious if that's just kind of
so a lot of my books are really written for emerging designers, which are students or young designers, a lot of people in the digital design realm who don't necessarily have the same formal education. So there's young people for books like Thinking on Type and Type on Screen and Graphic Design Thinking and The New Basics. These are not written for polish air.
Right.
They're written for people who want to get better at doing design. But then my museum books are, for, I'd say, a more intellectually elite.
Okay.
But they sell a lot fewer number of copies, too. So the museum books are more traditional, scholarly.
Yeah.
And luscious. They're not handbooks. They're more, they're museum books that have to be kind of elegant and formal and serious.
I hadn't thought about this actually before, and so this is a question that I wasn't planning on asking, but you said you're not writing, this is not a book that's for polish air or something like that. What are the types of books that somebody like that, or even, I guess who's writing the books that are for somebody like you?
The books that I read? Well, I just got this book, Fire Signs, A Semiotic Theory for Graphic Design.
I've never heard of this.
And I don't know.
Is this new?
Yeah, it just came out, so I got this from our library. I just read an incredible book by Mark Wigley and Beatrice Colleen.
Are We Human?
Are We Human?
I just read it too. Oh.
That's fantastic.
It's so
and that
good.
Is incredible writing.
Yeah.
And it is scholarly. It has footnotes in the back, and it's all very professional. And I believe in that. I do footnote my work or include sources in some kind of system.
I love that book so much.
But that's a great book. So I read a lot of stuff like that is high level for people in the profession.
Do you see, this is another question that I wasn't planning on asking you, but it's kind of connecting these last two questions. Do you see part of your job as a writer, as a curator, and as a educator to take that kind of high theory that's impenetrable in a lot of ways and kind of remold it or communicate it in ways?
That's what scholarship is that it draws on other writing.
Yeah.
And that as a curator, you need to be attending to what are designers doing in the field.
Yeah.
But also, what is the conversation? Like, what's going on and how to bring those things together into a story told through artifacts. Basically. Yeah. And so you might be reading scientific things as well as philosophy and design criticism, design journalism. And so you're not making something out of nothing.
Right.
And most writers are making something out of the stew of the contemporary moment.
Yeah. I always think of like Malcolm Gladwell gets a bad rap for oversimplifying his story, taking a lot of science things and simplifying them down. And I read an interview with him once where he just kind of said, the scientist who did that study is not the audience for my books. And I actually think there's something nice about that idea of taking the stuff and giving it to another audience who otherwise wouldn't have seen it. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of what a lot of your books are
like. I want designers to care about critical theory.
Yeah.
And about, neuroscience or Gestalt psychology, all these topics that relate to design, but need to be translated and made relevant and made into a story that we can all get.
So how does that, the work of yours that I know the least amount is Cooper Hewitt and your curatorial work. And I've seen your shows and I know kind of the end product, but I don't know kind of your process there or what even your goals for kind of staging an exhibition are. And so I kind of have just those same questions I just asked you, but in a museum context, like who are you expecting to come see a show?
In a museum, you have a very, very broad audience. So unlike somebody buying Thinking with Type, where I have a pretty clear idea what someone needs from a book with that title, in a museum, people are coming to be entertained. They're coming as journalists themselves or as expert audiences who want to be surprised and want to learn something new. They're coming as the companion of somebody who has a professional interest,
Right.
and they're patiently standing there. And sometimes I put something in that I know is for the guy who's there with someone who came to see the ball gown.
Right.
And this person might.
That's always my girlfriend when I bring her to all the design shows that she doesn't care about. I don't know exactly how to ask this, but how do you kind of like think about collecting objects that will appeal to people at that whole level? How do you kind of bring those together so it's not dumbed down for the...
Well, it's not the objects, but what you say about them.
Oh.
So the objects should have some interest to everyone. But how do you present them? How do you interpret them? How much depth do you support them with? Because some people want to read a lot, and they want to know a lot of detail, and some people just really want to have a good experience that is intuitive just from walking through a space.
Right.
And so it's a lot like writing a book, but you're creating something where you know that no one's going to look at every single thing.
Yeah. And
how are you going to make choices that help people?
How do... I mean, I've watched you over the last 2 years and how you kind of have this schedule of kind of when you're teaching and when you're writing and when you're doing museum things. And they're, these kind of designated times. But I'm interested in how those actually overlap and relate to each other. How does a show that you're working on filter into things that you're teaching?
It totally relates. And so as a teacher, I always think that's where I get my ideas.
From teaching.
It's from teaching and from being around young people who are making things and doing courses like the theory class or my design history class, where I have to constantly be delivering an accessible story about the avant-garde, about experience design, about neuroscience.
Right.
And that by engaging with that at the level of a college teacher allows me to then really bring that into my curating in a way that if I were only studying like objects and the origins of objects, as many curators have to because that's what their mission is. So to me, they really connect. And now I'm doing a book with Cooper Hewitt on storytelling. That Cooper Hewitt's publishing that comes completely out of my teaching and my belief that designers have to deliver an experience to people.
I have another weird question, and I'm sorry that I keep asking you these questions that I had not planned, but you're actually like bringing up a lot of things that I had not thought about before. When you're at like the very, very origins of curating a show, is it an object that comes first? Like, do you see something in the collection and think we're building something around this, or is there like an idea or a theory?
My shows all start from an idea.
Okay.
I'm really not an object person.
Okay.
I love collaborating with people who are more so. So I've been doing shows with a younger curator at Cooper Hewitt, Andrea Lips.
Oh, yeah.
So we did the beauty show together, and now she's collaborating with me on a show called The Senses.
Oh, okay.
And I love working with her because she brings her eye that sometimes I feel I don't have. But all my shows start with an idea.
Okay.
And that may be unusual.
Yeah.
But I think that Walter Benjamin show at the Jewish Museum, I love seeing that as an example of curating. And that came with the idea.
Yeah.
What if we took the Boulevard project and found examples of contemporary art that reflected those themes?
Yeah.
And then you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
So I love that. I think it's very brainy, and that's how I like to work. But different curators have very different impetus behind their work.
How long I have another two-part question. How long are you kind of thinking about an idea or a subject or a thing before it starts to turn into something? And then how do you know if it's, oh, this is a book or this is a lecture or this is a exhibition? You know, do you think about it in those terms?
The lectures usually come first.
Okay.
And then they become, and it might be a lecture at MICA for our students, or it might be a public lecture. But the lectures are the kitchen for me. I mean, it's a huge part of my practice.
Yeah.
I love studying the performance aspect, but also the content. Right. And that's where it all starts for me. And then I write and do other things based on that. But the lectures are where I test it and discover.
And then are there times where things will, like, you know, split off and it's like, oh, this is just a book.
Yeah.
Or oh, this is gonna be a show.
Oh yeah, that's the key. So I started working on this storytelling project. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the most interesting part of it to me was the part about multisensory design. And so now that's a separate project.
Oh, but those were originally
it's still a chapter in the storytelling book.
Oh, interesting.
But it's the basis of this much bigger, huge exhibition at Cooper Hewitt with its own book that's more science-y and serious, whereas my storytelling book is very how-to and very fun and kind of humorous.
I have one more question kind of just about you and your career, and then I want to step back and just talk about the profession at large for a little bit to kind of wrap things up. But something that's been very amazing to me watching you is how in all of your roles, you have to have your finger on the pulse of kind of the design zeitgeist at the moment. And you seem to do a good job at that. You know, whether it's a show and you're kind of pulling these obscure designers from around the world, or in a lecture to students and you're connecting something from history to something that a designer did, you know, last week. What's your media diet like, or how do you kind of consume these things to make sure that you're kind of staying current?
Well, I never feel like I'm current enough.
Really?
I mean, it's very challenging. You know, I do a lot of blogs that push, newsletters like Dezeen and Core 77 and AIGAI on design I really like. It's nice that. Yeah. And I don't throw them away. I look at them every day. And that really helps. I go to museums, but that's slow, you know, and there's shows all over the world. I can't go to them all. Yeah. And all the fairs, I can't afford that. People think, curators are on airplanes all the time going to the art shows. Yeah. Like the maybe the museum director is doing that, but the curators, we have no money. Yeah. So we're absorbing it through the media.
And then how do you, because I feel like I try to do that also. You know, I subscribe to, 50 blogs or whatever. I get all the newsletters. I follow, however 100 people on Twitter so I can be someone that keeps up. But how do you, and this is a hard question, so I apologize, but how do you retain it? Or how do you 6 months later are working on something and are like, oh, I saw that thing on, it's nice that 6 months ago.
I take notes. I take obsessive notes.
Okay.
There's no other way. If I think something's important, I, put it in a file. I use Google Docs, which is actually kind of clumsy, but it works for me. I take notes on everything I read. I take notes on every conversation. Okay. And you're foolish to think that you are going to remember anything if you don't write it down. And so by writing it down, then I can find it. And one of the things I'll do when I'm working on then writing is I'll reread my notes on a topic. And it's just amazing how much knowledge is in my notes. That's knowledge that I really worked on getting. Right.
That wasn't, you weren't keeping in your head.
Yeah, but that I worked to get. So I feel like I have legitimate to then write about it and incorporate it, of course, with sources and all that. It's very important to keep track of where you find everything. But that's really fun to go through
Right.
and read your notes and go, oh, that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then those notes feed into everything that you're doing. Those get added into a class talk, or
Oh yeah.
it's like, oh, this gets quoted in a book, or
yeah, and it's all on Google Docs, so I can
yeah.
find it for any
search
topic.
it.
Yeah, but I have
okay.
files on topics that are important to me, but it's all there and it's great.
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, people use Evernote.
Yeah.
But that I happen to use Google Docs, and I find it pretty effective.
Okay. I want to step back and I have a couple questions, just kind of general questions about kind of the design industry, design profession, design culture at large. And this podcast kind of like at its core is about design criticism, and that's kind of a loose word that I even feel like as I've been doing this maybe doesn't always feel right.
Maybe design culture,
design discourse has seemed
I really
much
like
more
the idea of discourse.
More interested in, more related to what I'm interested in, and that's exactly what I was going to ask you was how has the design discourse changed over the course of your career? So you mentioned kind of being in college and having that interest in critical theory, and there wasn't a lot of people talking about it, and then I don't know why I'm answering this question for you. And then in the 90s, there was this kind of big interest in it for a while. And now, the New York Times publishes stories on, Dubai having a new typeface, or, that a company like redesigns a logo. How, as somebody who's kind of worked through all of that, how have you, and has been a part of that discourse the whole time, how have you felt like it's changed?
Yeah, well, it's gotten much broader. Yeah, so the 90s was really exciting with emigre and all the debates and arguments and a sense of tension and the whole designer as author. And all those things were very exciting to be part of and to participate in. And then the internet, that conversation sort of went away, and the visuals that went with it sort of went out of fashion. But now, it's become more of a public, more accessible. The design field has expanded so much, the whole user experience and interaction design. It's like some of it I don't even know, like, is that design?
Yeah.
It's like, well, what did you do? You made a chart saying how users open an account. It just seems so like minute, and yet it's so necessary and so part of
Has that kind of opening of the discourse changed your work or how you think about your work at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the fundamental, the whole notion of the experience economy is to me very important and a big part of my thinking about the 21st century. And what that is really the notion that everything we encounter with over time.
Right.
And I think design was always thought of as more of a thing.
Yeah.
But when you consider that even a poster is perceived over time, that your eyes are moving around.
Oh, right.
Creating a kind of little movie of a poster. You never take in the whole thing at once. Our vision is just in constant motion. And so that element of time is very connected to digital media, and the way we actually interact with anything is temporal and experiential.
Yeah. Does it change how you think about kind of what you're going to write about, or what kind of show you're going to put on, because there's just this consciousness that people are just aware of it now?
Absolutely. So my storytelling book is really going to be a great book for people in user experience, because it's about this dimension of time and different models and paradigms. Is it a circle? Is it a triangle? Is it a square? Like, how are you going to diagram the experience of time in a project? I think it's super interesting.
That's really interesting.
And it goes beyond design as like choosing fonts, and more about this temporal experience.
I like that a lot.
And then my exhibition about the senses is called The Senses: Design Beyond Vision. And it's about the haptic and the audio and the texture and the body. And that really takes you beyond the static object and into an experience over time.
I have two questions again, and they're kind of related. You talked about how exciting that the 90s were. And I've talked about this with a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of immigrant people, and, anyone who has listened to a half dozen of these episodes has heard me say this, so, it's probably getting annoying, but I try really hard not to look at that era with, kind of rose-tinted glasses as this kind of amazing time. Yeah. Okay. Do you think that's possible again, or do you think that type of really rich, deep discourse around graphic design is possible in 2017?
Well, it's probably happening with digital media. I feel like there was a lot maybe 5 years ago about the nature of publishing,
right?
And different models for how a publication could be organized.
Yeah.
It was the social book and the open book,
right?
And participatory media. I think it is. I think there is a really interesting.
That's a good point, because that's something that's actually come up in a lot of the other interviews that I've done. That and we were just saying it. There's more people talking about design than ever before. The difference is that it's just scattered. It's everywhere. There isn't a immigrant or these kind of central places where people can go to kind of get that. I'm very curious. This is a question that I've asked everybody that I've talked to. What are the kind of issues or the topics or the subjects that you think are important for designers to be discussing or to be a part of the contemporary design discourse or contemporary design criticism? What are the things that are being overlooked right now that we should be talking about and writing about and thinking about?
Well, I'm really interested in design for inclusion, and that can mean for disabilities, it can mean socioeconomic, globalism, broader use of language. So I think that's super interesting. I think that book, Ruben Pater's book, The Politics of Design, really gets at a pulse of a different way of looking at design as not so Eurocentric. So I think that's really important, really interesting. Of course, sustainability is extremely important and has so many implications for designers. Transparency, surveillance, all that I think is very important. The truth, the relationship that designers have to telling the truth is of great urgency. There's so many things for us to touch upon. I feel like that's just been the recurring theme. What has ended up becoming the recurring theme of these interviews is that the design discourse can't, as important as it is for us to be talking about colors and typography and layout, we can't end it there. We have to be talking about all that stuff behind it and in front of it too. And often that's the stuff that kind of goes missing in the discourse. My last question is hopefully an easy one, but I'm interested in who are the writers or designers or curators or even books that have really kind of influenced you and shaped how you think about all of these things, or the people you keep turning back to. Well, Mark Wigley and Beatrice Colomina, who are my generation, continue and have for my whole career. I've always watched their work. So they're top of my list of brilliant. And I love, Ruben Pater's book as, and less in depth, but a really nice statement of what can be. So they're kind of on two poles, What else? I'm a big fan of Johanna Drucker, who's also my generation. Michael Rock, of course. I'm trying to think of people who are younger.
Yeah, well, I was going to add
so
that.
Ruben Pater.
There isn't anyone yet. No one's
doing
it.
I'm sure, but it takes time to get the voice, And so I think
I mean, and it comes back to kind of what we were just saying, where it's like, you see something like, is that even design? So much of my opinion is so much of some of the good design writing maybe wouldn't even seem like it's about design,
well, I
because
think
it's about
Rob Giampietro has written some interesting things.
Yeah.
That I've read, that I have followed, and obviously the ...
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
That's very high level, very difficult, dense material. David Reinford.
Yeah.
Incredible. So that's, younger people, very ambitious writing. Okay. Oh, and like Manuel Lima, who writes about information design.
Oh, I don't think I know.
Oh, well, he's fantastic. I don't think of him so much as a writer as someone who has curated and made sense of information graphics.
Oh, okay.
Incredible. And he writes well.
Yeah.
But it's about pulling together the story of the history and the future, everything. Yeah, Manuel Lima.
Okay.
Amazing.
Ellen, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad that we finally got to sit down and do this. Nice. And thank you. I obviously didn't want you to be like the first person that I talked to. Because you were also, like the advisor for this project. So thank you.
Well, it was very nice.
For this, and then just also like thank you for like these last 2 years and for help. Like your fingerprints are all over this project in different ways, and nice. So I think it's a better project because of you and because I was here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's amazing what you've done, and I know you'll do more.
This episode was recorded on May 22nd, 2017 in Baltimore, Maryland. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.